What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou from the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran.com. And today we're going to be talking about Trump's visit to the UK. So, Alexander, it was a busy day for Trump in the UK, for Theresa May as well. I would say it was a roller coaster visit to the UK. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of lefts, a lot of rights. Things were kind of all over the place. Summarize the visit. You being in the UK as well, summarize Trump's visit to the UK and his meeting with Theresa May.
I don't think in all the time that I've lived in Britain, which has been a long time, by the way, I don't think I've ever seen a visit like this. I think the British establishment don't know what hit them. I think the Queen is stunned. I think Theresa May is reeling. I think the newspapers are in a state of utter confusion. And I think, as always, Donald Trump advanced his agenda extremely cleverly and very well. And if I may say so, the thing that really caused the devastation was an extraordinary interview that Donald Trump either gave or didn't give to The Sun, which is a big tabloid newspaper here, which basically made it very clear what he thinks of Theresa May and what he thinks of the way she's made a complete hash of Brexit and what he really thinks of the entire British establishment that he has to deal with. So, I mean, I think this is an astonishing tour de force. And I'm going to say something else. If you look at the newspapers very carefully, not the left of centre ones like The Guardian, but the more conservative ones like the London Times and the Daily Telegraph, there is a grudging understanding of what Donald Trump is doing and a growing respect for him and a realisation that this is actually a very formidable, if a very unconventional and very different politician from the one that the British have been used to dealing with up to now. So I think this is an extraordinary tour de force by Donald Trump, and one which the British establishment has never experienced before and will never forget.
Alexander, you mentioned the Sun interview, that it was very critical of May, but then we saw pictures of them before their press conference at the Chequers. They were holding hands. They seemed to be getting along and supporting each other during the presser. Is Trump now friends with May, and is May now friends with Trump?
I think somebody in Britain described it brilliantly, actually, when he said that Donald Trump is his own soft cop to his own hard cop. He plays this game brilliantly. He makes it absolutely clear what he really thinks of Theresa May. And then he goes through all the sort of formalities which we have just seen, which of course keeps everybody completely off balance. They don't quite know what they're doing with him. Now, if he'd just been rude to Theresa May, the whole thing would have ended in shambles, and everybody would have said, well, Donald Trump is this awful man, and it would have actually consolidated support for Theresa May. In fact, what he did by appearing to support her after he so publicly undermined her is that he made her look weak and ridiculous. And I think this is exactly what he knows how to do. He's, as I said, far cleverer and more instinctively calculated than I think people understand. Somebody else put it, I thought, incredibly well. The extraordinary thing about Donald Trump is that when he speaks without thinking, he says what he thinks. And that's that I think is really, quite astute, actually.
Yeah, very astute. Now, do you think that May fell for Donald Trump's trap pretty easily? Because May supported Trump's actions at NATO. I mean, she was very supportive, and she boasted about how the UK meets its spending requirements for the alliance. And she even showed that she was supportive of Trump meeting with Putin on the 16th, where you have the whole U.S. establishment, the whole Congress. They're just freaking out over the meeting between Trump and Putin. So can you say that May really just fell for Trump's charisma or or the way he plays that hard cop, soft cop?
Well, May has absolutely no idea how to deal with Donald Trump. I mean, this is somebody so completely outside her imagination that she really just doesn't know what to do when confronted by him. I think to say that she fell for him, I think it'd be more correct to say that Donald Trump has her exactly where he wants her. He's able to he plays her like a violin. He undermines her because he clearly doesn't like her. He undermines her in Britain. He makes her seem ridiculous. He also makes her look weak. And at the same time, he gets from her all the support he wants from her. So, I mean, I think he comes out looking much stronger. Theresa May looks much weaker. And at the same time, Donald Trump's opponents in the United States looking to Britain, the country which has always been supposedly the US's special friend. What they see is a British government which, however insulted and bruised it is by Donald Trump, invariably ends up doing what Donald Trump wants, which makes Donald Trump in turn look much stronger and more commanding. So I think he is playing this with great skill, as he always does.
Right. Going back to how May has a lot of domestic and internal problems right now in her government, and you kind of answered this question already, but I want you to dig a little deeper into it and elaborate. My question was going to be to you was, do you think that Trump provided her cover for her domestic woes? But I guess he didn't really provide her any cover for her domestic woes, especially with Brexit and the way she's negotiating with the EU and how she's going to negotiate with the US. My hunch is that, like you said, he made her look foolish. He probably did her more harm than good. Is that a correct assumption? Can you elaborate on that?
I do think so. I think that's true. I mean, I would say that Theresa May's problems are much greater than Donald Trump. I mean, at the end of the day, even if this a visit had gone ahead in a completely conventional way, Theresa May has very serious problems in Britain. I mean, she's managed to pursue a Brexit policy, which, as we've discussed in an earlier program, pleases absolutely nobody and doesn't really make any kind of sense. And I think a lot of people in Britain see this and understand this. And I think she has lost an awful lot of respect in Britain already. Having said that, there are going to be some people in Britain who, looking at all of this, will say to themselves, what a contrast between this extraordinary and vigorous and powerful personality who is Donald Trump, and our own completely faceless, uncharismatic, colourless Prime Minister who is clearly so out of ideas and so completely out of her depth. And there will be some people, I'm sure, in Britain, including in the Conservative Party, who say to themselves, well, this simply can't go on. If we're going to have a future as a important power, we need to have someone who is able to take on Trump, at least on something like equal terms, or at least, if not on equal terms, who at least Donald Trump will take seriously, and who will be taken seriously in other countries, in Europe, in Russia, in China, wherever. So I think that this has chipped away at Theresa May's position to some extent. It's not, as I said, her biggest problem, but I don't think it's certainly not done her any good. And I think, on balance, it has done her some harm.
What do you make of Trump complimenting Boris Johnson?
Well, this is actually interesting. I mean, I don't know what Donald Trump really thinks of Boris Johnson. I suspect, again, he was trolling May, frankly. May and Johnson don't get on very well. Donald Trump has made it absolutely clear, and we've had articles about this in the British media, that he doesn't think much of May either. Boris Johnson, whatever else he is a personality. And I think that Donald Trump, who is hostile to the EU, is naturally drawn to a political leader, that's to say Boris Johnson, whom he doesn't know very well, but who is also apparently critical of the EU. But I suspect that if Boris Johnson were to become Prime Minister of Britain, I rather think that Donald Trump, like an awful lot of people, would find that beneath Boris Johnson's bluster, there is only bluster. Whereas beneath Donald Trump's bluster, there is quite a lot of substance. And as you and I have been saying all along, a very, very clever and effective politician.
Finally, the other day we did a video on the protests that were going to be taking place in London. Can you give us a quick summary? Do you think the protests had any impact on May, on Trump? Do you think the U.S. Public, especially the resistance, the people that are against Trump, do you think they took any energy or any solace from the UK protests, or were they just pretty much a dud?
I think the protests helped Donald Trump. I think that's my own personal view. I mean, they increase the profile of this visit. They make the way the protesters conducted themselves with this ridiculous blip, we talked about it before, and all the rest has made them look, frankly, undignified and ridiculous at the very time when they're accusing Donald Trump of being undignified and ridiculous. So I think actually it helps him. I think these protests always do, because his opponents in the United States and in Britain simply don't seem to be able to take him seriously. And that is where they consistently go wrong. Now, as for Theresa May, I think she's caught realistically between a rock and a hard place. As I said, I think on the one hand, she weakly wants to be seen getting along with Trump. As I said already, he doesn't like her. But what the protests do is they confirm once again that there are an awful lot of people in Britain who are very uncomfortable about seeing the British Prime Minister getting along with Donald Trump. I think a lot of those people, in truth, would not be very happy to see any British Prime Minister with any US President. There's always been a current of anti-Americanism here. I think with Barack Obama that went into omission. But I think a lot of people who were protesting now would have protested if it was George W. Bush, for example, turning up here. And I think to that extent, this has to be taken predictably. But as I said, it has weakened May, just as the connection with Bush weakened Blair. But I think it's strengthened Trump. That's what I think about this protest.
Yeah, I mean, this is the protests are nothing new to London, and like you said, Bush was a very controversial president in the eyes of the English population, the UK population.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this was nothing. This was nothing new.
Well, it was new. It was new in the way it was done, and as I said, I think that has helped. I think the way it was done has helped Trump. As I said, instead of it being done in a serious way and making serious arguments against him, as I said, it's done in a way that, as I said, exaggerates the comedy in a way that I think helps him. And I think the joke, in a sense, is back on them. That's to say, those who have been protesting against him. And I think people really who are opposed to Donald Trump really do need to start to understand that. I don't think there's much sign of them doing so at the moment, but I think that's the mistake they're continuously making.
Yeah, because they're so ideologically focused, and everything's so much about political identity politics, excuse me, that no one's focusing on policy. And so these protests are really not about policy. They're more about ideology than anything else.
I think that's exactly right. I think you've hit the nail on the head precisely.
Yeah. So we have Trump now heading off to Helsinki, and we're going to be doing a lot of videos on that, and we'll see how that one goes.
Well, it's the two adults in the room finally meeting with each other. That's how it looks to me at the moment.
Yeah, I think after Trump's meeting with Maybot, he'll actually appreciate sitting across the table from a leader who can actually make decisions and who knows in which direction his country's going towards.
Exactly, and that's what it's all about.
Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you very much for another great interview and analysis. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Also click on the notifications tab to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And remember to visit the Duran shop, pick up a Duran t-shirt, help support the Duran. Until next time, take care.